Hey, Brian Goulet here of the Goulet Pen Company, and I have something here in my hand that I think a lot of you are going to be interested in. Most of you, if you've been involved in the fountain pen world at all in the last couple of years, you know about the Noodler's flex pens. They're some of the most affordable flex pens that you can buy, and Noodler's is a very popular brand. So, if you've got a Noodler's Ahab or a Konrad, and you like the flex, but you find that you just don't always want it or it's not always practical for you, a lot of times you've been asking, what else can I use in this pen? You know, do I have to use a whole nother pen, or can I swap out the nib for something that's not flexible? Well, I previously answered that question myself when I came out with the Goulet number 6 size nib back in April of 2013, and that was a big hit. A lot of people like it, great, solved that problem. However, Nathan Tardif over at Noodler's decided he wanted to offer his own nib as a Noodler's nib for these pens. So he came out with a number 6 size Noodler's standard non-flexible nib. This is the first time he's ever offered these. Way back in the day, when Noodler's first introduced their nib creeper pen with a number 2 size nib, he offered the standard nib. And then he moved to flex nibs, and then the standard nib went away, and it's been all flex nibs on Noodler's pens ever since, until now. So they're not shipping on the pens, but they are shipping separately. And the best part about them is they're only $2. So you can play around with these nibs as much as you want. If you want some nibs to test out grinding and smoothing and all that stuff, these are perfect for that because they're so inexpensive. So I'm gonna show you what these nibs are all about today, show you how to swap it out on the Ahab and the Konrad, the Noodler's number 6 nib. So this is it. Noodler's standard number 6 nib. Stamped very simply with Noodler's Ink Co. It's just a straight up nib. Nothing too fancy going on here. You know, it's got a little air hole in it, got the slit, tipping, everything you'd think with a normal nib. This is a fine medium size. It's going to be somewhere between a fine and a medium. This nib is really made to fit in an Ahab and a Konrad. That's the size it's for. It's possible that this could fit into other pens, but this is a Noodler's product. It's made to fit in other Noodler's products. It won't fit in the nib creeper, the smaller pen, but it will fit in these two. So if you are trying to use it in any other pen, if it has a number 6 nib, it might be worth it to give it a shot. It's only a $2 nib. If it doesn't work that great, yeah, it's not a huge loss for you. But anyway, let me show you how to swap these out. It's pretty straightforward, especially on the Ahab. The Ahab, all you gotta do is grab right at the base of the nib and the feed and kind of wiggle it back and forth a little bit, and it'll just pull right out. It's got a breather tube that's attached into the feed. That's fine. You can leave that in place. You can take it out, whatever suits your interest best. This opening here on the Ahab, it's not perfectly circular. It has kind of a little cutout for the nib. And let me try and show you that up close if I can. It's very hard to see, especially on this clear model, but it's got this little cutout right up there, okay? So when you're putting the nib in, the feed is going to hold it in place, and the nib is actually going to seat right into that little area. So I can actually kind of tuck it in there without even having the feed in place. So that's where this thing is going to sit. So it really is made to fit in there. It wants to fit in that way. If you try and fit it in any other way, you're going to be forcing it. So the best way to try to get this thing in there is to hold the nib and the feed in place pretty much as if it's going to be in the pen before you put it in there, just like so, okay? Doesn't have to be exact, but that's approximately where you want it. Okay, you want to try and find that cutout at the top here, and you want to put the nib in the orientation so that it's going to slide right in place. Now, it's possible to put it in the wrong way. It's going to be tough. Of course, depending on how much experience you have replacing these nibs, it might feel tough to you even if it's in the correct one. For me, I've done it so many times, I know if I'm putting it in the wrong way, but let me intentionally turn it upside down and put it in the wrong way. It'll start to go, and if I force it, it'll go in a little bit the wrong way, but even still, it's gonna be sticking out way too far. I'm gonna know I've done something wrong, and then I'm gonna wanna back it out and then reevaluate my situation. But I really wanna try and find that top area here, get that nib kind of seated in place, and then it'll all kind of just fall into place once you have it in the right location. You go to push it in, the feed's only going to go back so far. You can't really push it back too far. And the nib itself, if you have it in that right indentation there, it's going to kind of naturally want to seat itself in the right place. And then you just want to double check it to make sure that you have the feed kind of tucked in there. You don't want the feed off to one side. You want it to be kind of centered. So if you have to jostle it a little bit, you know, you can always take it out, put it back in, whatever. And this is going to be basically the same. There we go. That's what I like. This is going to be about the same method that you use for the flex nib and for the standard nib. But now I have the standard nib in place. I can ink it up and I can have at it. Now, one thing about these nibs is that the way that this feed is set in here, this is an ebonite feed. You can heat set it and you can reset it based on your nib. With conventional nibs, the conventional nib is going to go down just a little bit, okay? So it's going to have a little bit of a downward curve. Flex nibs, because of the pressure when you're writing, they're going to tend to curve up just a little bit. Well, the feed on these Noodler's pens are going to tend to flare up just a little bit, okay? So what that means is that when you put a conventional nib that's curving a little bit down, now this is all very slight, you may not even see it very much with your naked eye, but when you've got a nib that's going down and a feed that's going up, it can give a tendency to want to pinch the feed on the underside of the nib, and it may want to split the tines out a little bit. It may cause it to write a little bit scratchy. It may cause it to you know, have some flow, some starting issues if it is very severe, or it may cause it to write really, really wet if it's just opening up that flow too much. I haven't had that really be a problem yet with these nibs. I'm saying the potential is there for that to happen. So if you want to do that, if you are willing to try heat setting your nib, I'm not going to cover that in this video. I know Nathan has done a video on that before. Other people have videos out there on heat setting. It's not an extremely complicated process, but it is a little bit involved. So I'm just going to go ahead and preface it and say, try putting this nib in there without heat setting it. And if it just doesn't work to your liking and you're having some issues, you may want to look more into heat setting. Anyway, so now I want to try putting it on the Konrad. Okay, so I'm going to take the nib out of the Ahab. It's very, you know, once you really get the hang of it, it pretty much takes about 10 seconds to replace it. So got the nib off my Ahab. I've got a Konrad here. This is a clear Konrad. Now the Konrad is set up a little bit differently than the Ahab. The Konrad does not have a indentation in it like the Ahab does. The Konrad is just a big old circle inside there. So it really doesn't matter what orientation you put your nib in your feed inside the pen. You can put it here, you can turn it around, you can stick it in any orientation you want, and it'll hold it in just the same. It's held in there by friction. The difference is this pen, you can take this feed and you can drop it all the way into that pen. So you really have to put the nib and the feed in together at the same time. So I've got my flex nib here. I'm taking that out. I want to align up my nib and my feed approximately where I want them to end up. So somewhere around there, okay? Right about there. And then I just hold them in that position. Oh, I lost my focus. There we go. Somewhere around there. Okay, so now I just want to hold that position and stick it into the pen. Okay, and then trying to keep the nib and the feed together, I want to push it in a pretty decent amount and try and get them in as deeply as I can without causing it to bend and skew all out of place. And that's about where I want to be. Okay, I don't have an approximate measurement there for you, but it's pretty much, I want the bottom of the nib to be about where the threads are. Okay, I can see that here on the clear one. Of course, I'm realizing as I'm saying that, unless you have a clear pen, you're not going to be able to use that as a reference, but that is about where I want it to be. Okay, if you have it in much higher than that, it could cause you a problem where the nib would actually start to hit the top of the cap. Okay, that's something you have to be aware of when you're replacing the nibs on these pens, or even if you're adjusting the standard flex nib on the pen. That's something you got to be aware of. But once you get it right in place, that's it. You're good to write. It's really pretty straightforward. So I knew that one thing a lot of people would be curious about was how does this nib size stack up? I do have this in the nib nook, so you can compare it to whatever pen that we have in there, a whole different varieties of nibs and pens. I thought Lamy would be a pretty good comparison because a lot of people are familiar with Lamy pens. So I inked up a Lamy with Noodler's black, as well as this Noodler's standard, the non-flex nib with Noodler's black, and give it a test drive. So the Lamy medium is definitely broader. The fine is pretty close. I would say if there's one nib that's probably the closest, it would be the Lamy fine steel nib. The extra fine was a little bit finer, so it's really going to depend. I know the extra fines can vary just a little bit in size on some of the Lamy nibs. Some of the broader extra fines may be kind of close, but you know, Noodler's number 6 nib is advertised as a fine/medium, which would mean that you would think that it would end up somewhere between a fine and a medium. I'm finding that it's going just a little bit finer than the Lamy steel fine, or somewhere thereabouts. It's going to depend probably on the type of ink, the type of paper that you're using, and so on. I did find the flow to be pretty generous, but the nib size is fairly fine. Now, I don't know, I haven't tested like 100 of these nibs. I don't know if every single one is going to end up being exactly this fine. It's possible that they may vary a little bit, but that's what I found, at least with the one that I'm testing here. It does have a little bit of feedback to it. So this is a Noodler's Ahab here that I have with that number 6 nib. It's going to write with a little bit more feedback than what you'd typically expect. And I'm getting a little bit of starting stuff there. I just filled the pen and we'll see how I'm able to go here. You know, I'm not expecting miracles, honestly, from this nib. I haven't heat set this one. I just literally replaced the nib into this flex pen. So I'm sure if I was to heat set it or something, I might expect a little bit better. The flow is keeping up great. You can probably audibly hear that nib a little bit. It's not scratchy. I definitely wouldn't call it scratchy. Maybe some people online will describe it that way in their reviews. I have not found it to feel scratchy. It definitely has a lot of feedback though. More so than the Lamy nibs, more so than most nibs that I use on a regular basis. But anyway, these dots here, these are 5mm dots. I don't know if that helps to give you some kind of reference. You know, here if I'm, you know, just writing Noodler's, you know, number 6 nib. I didn't complete my B. There you go. So it may or may not, you know, fulfill all of your world's desires when it comes to a nib, but you know, for $2, can you really complain that much? You know, you definitely can. This is the internet here we're talking about. But anyway, I think it's a good job. You know, I'm really appreciative of Nathan for having put out this nib. I think it'll greatly enhance the utility of the Ahab and the Konrad pen. And though it's not going to be the utmost of everything for everyone, I do think it's going to help to make a good pen even better. If you have any questions about the Noodler's nib or anything else, you can always leave me a comment on YouTube or on Ink Nouveau, or hit me up on Twitter or Facebook. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thanks so much for watching today, and as always, write on.